First item, can I call on Councillor Smith to say prayers, please? Councillor Smith, can I call on you to say prayers, please?
Thank you, Councillor Adams. Father God, as we come now to you, we now pray that everything we say in this meeting this afternoon, Father, would be upholding, and Father, the decisions we make would give a better future for the people of Derbyshire. Father, in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Apologies for absence. Reform, please.
Thank you, Chair. The apologies are as follows: Councillor Hodgson, Councillor Chambers, Councillor Hunter, Councillor Harper, Councillor Wood and Councillor M. Smith.
Thank you. Conservatives, please.
Yeah, apologies for Councillor Jean Warnby, please.
Thank you. And Labour, all present? Yeah. Lib Dems, all present. Everybody else is here, I think. Yep, thank you. Declaration of interest. On the 30th September 2025, the Governance, Ethics and Standards Committee granted a general dispensation until the 31st of March 2028 to those elected members to enable them to participate and vote in the decision relating to local government reorganisation, where they would otherwise have a disclosable pecuniary interest because they or their spouse are a borough or district councillor in Derbyshire or Derby City Council. The minutes will record the granting of this dispensation, and there is no need for individual members affected to declare this interest today. But are there any other interests not relating to that members wish to declare, please? Councillor Monkman.
Yes, Chair. I have voted already at a Borough Council meeting, so I will be abstaining today, but here to listen to the debate.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, was that a hand? No. No. Anyone else? No. Thank you very much.
Chair, I understand it's a voluntary declaration. Is that a necessary declaration, given the number of people who are Borough Council? I thought we had got an exemption now.
I'm not sure it was necessary, was it? She's already voted, so change. Yeah. So it wasn't really necessary. Sorry, the monitoring officer is going to advise.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. So obviously the councillor has advised in relation to particular voting at a particular meeting, and she is clearly at liberty to voluntarily disclose that today. That is quite separate to the DPI dispensation that has been granted.
Thank you. This meeting will be live streamed in spite of the technical glitches. And available for subsequent playback through the Council's website and YouTube channel. You should be aware that the Council is a data controller under the Data Protection Act. Data collected during the webcast will be retained in accordance with the Council's published policy. If any member of the public has concerns about this, please speak to a member of staff. Please ensure that mobile phones and IT equipment are set to silent. Please speak clearly into the microphone so that both councillors and members of the public can hear you. And a reminder that the voting buttons are being used. Well, I think we're going to have a show of hands. Please press the button once to request to speak. No, we're not doing that. Yes, the buttons aren't working. Right, I've just said that. Okay. Right, so the main item 5, local government reorganisation. It's the only report on today's agenda. I call on Councillor Graves to move the report, please.
Microphone. Is that better? I'd just like to introduce Simon Stevens at the front desk, interim chief executive. I think it's your first time at this meeting, so welcome. Also, welcome to Councillor Paul McGuinness. He's now sitting in the right side of the chamber. Well done. Mr. Chairman, Uniting Derbyshire is a vision that Reform UK in Derbyshire works towards. I'm delighted to present to you a Uniting Derbyshire proposal that unites every part of Derbyshire where the Union flag flies strong. All villages, towns and Derby City are part of Derbyshire. We share a proud identity with strong communities and a spirit that William Wallace would have been proud of. Derbyshire has its roots and boundaries since 1086, although governance has seen several major reforms over the last 50 years. The Local Government Act of 1888 saw the creation of Derbyshire County Council in 1889. The newer Local Government Act of 1972 saw Derbyshire County Council in 1974 take upper-tier responsibility right across the county, incorporating the city for the first time. It was in 1997 that Derby gained unitary status and was separated in council terms from the county. What most people won't know is that all of these major changes came from Conservative governments. In 1888, it was the Prime Minister Marquis of Salisbury. In 1974, it was Edward Heath. And in 1997, it was John Major. Today's LGR process was also born from a Conservative government. And the current government has continued that process, believing that our current local government arrangements are too complex, too costly, and extremely inefficient. 10 councils covering the whole of Derbyshire, with our council covering the largest area of Derbyshire. Uniting Derbyshire into a single unified council will simplify local government. It will improve accountability and deliver better value for residents. Uniting Derbyshire will strengthen local identity whilst cutting bureaucracy, saving money that we can reinvest in frontline services. Uniting Derbyshire could realise nearly £144 million of savings in the first 5 years and 45 million each in the first 6 years, and 45 million every year after that. Uniting Derbyshire means a single council with one budget, one point of responsibility and better accountability. This greater efficiency will strengthen our partnerships with the NHS, Derbyshire Constabulary, EMCA, the East Midlands County Authority, and our voluntary organisations. Uniting Derbyshire holds stronger strategic and economic advantages. Our business communities would see a significant change to the way the council operates, bringing together all council functions across the whole of Derbyshire. Uniting Derbyshire is best for our residents, a single point of contact with identified councillors that deal with any aspect of council business, that it is so inefficient under the current arrangements. Our plan is to keep the parishes and town councils as they are giving that micro connection to smaller localised communities, whilst removing hundreds of politicians from the system. Now, doesn't that sound like a good majority for people? Less politicians. Uniting Derbyshire represents a once-in-a-generation opportunity that will benefit all Derbyshire residents. This is one of those common sense decisions that residents want us to grab the bull by the horns. Mr. Chairman, I am sure that many councillors in this chamber would want to celebrate this proposal with us, so I will sit down.
Can I ask for a seconder, please?
I'd like to second, and Mr. Chair, I'd like to reserve the right to respond later in the debate.
Thank you. And I've got seat numbers there. Hands. Any questions or contributions from members? Councillor Major.
Yeah, I was expecting lots of people to be standing up and saying how lovely, great an idea it is. But I think there's sometimes the problem with common sense is that everybody's view of common sense may be different. And I think there's an assumption here that this common sense says that bigger something is, the more efficient it will be. And I don't think that's actually always true. I think generally, as things get bigger, they get more bureaucratic, they become less nimble. And the ability to move and manoeuvre becomes harder. It was tried, this idea of making things very large and the state controlling everything, and having huge governments that have lots of experts. It was tried in the Soviet Union, and it was the nimble Western entrepreneurship that actually outperformed central control-led organisations. I'll leave you with that thought that it's not always the case that just because something's bigger, it's more efficient. In actual fact, things that are smaller can be far more efficient. And I could give you examples of where things are delivered very locally, and it is far more cost effective to do it that way than what it is for the county council or even government to deliver it for the government. What I find intriguing, Chairman, is that only a couple of weeks ago, the Deputy Chairman of this authority put a post on Facebook saying that, using expletives, saying that they will never vote for being part of Derby City, but yet we are here today. It'd be interesting to see if there's any comments regarding the change of heart on that front. And what surprised me, although there was lots of things I expected about a reform-led Derbyshire County Council, some I've been right and some I've been proved wrong on. But one thing I never expected from yourselves was that when the Labour government came along and said, we want you to do this, and this is a Labour government that is immensely unpopular, probably the most unpopular government we've had, that's proving to be completely inept. We've got complete massive infighting going on within the government, probably the most unpopular Prime Minister we've had in a century. And what happens when they come along and ask Derbyshire reform, what they want to do? You don't fight for what you... I know a lot of you believe in. A lot of you believe that actually this isn't a good idea, and you believe that this will be bad for Derbyshire and bad for your residents and bad for your local communities. That instead of fighting for it, you've said to the government, how high do you want us to jump? How big can we make it? How much out of local council can we take out? And that has surprised me, because the one thing I did expect from a reform-led Derbyshire County Council, it was try and stand up for a Labour government, and you haven't. You've rolled over, had your bellies tickled by them and said, yes, sir, whatever you say. So I hope you change your mind. I hope some of you will at least vote with your community who've clearly said in the consultation process that they don't want, particularly down my neck of the woods, that they don't want to be part of a greater Derby City. They don't want to be part of Derby City. I've heard some members saying, I think they're right, that they say it doesn't matter what we vote today, government will impose on us what they like. So if you feel like that, why not at least stand up and have your voice heard and fight against it and fight for the people of Derbyshire and fight for your local communities, fight for Long Eaton South and say we don't want this. If the government then come and override it, at least you fought for it, not gone, how high would you like us to jump and become the government's poodle?
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Clark, please.
Today we're here to discuss an option for which this administration did not include in the public engagement. The document papers for this meeting mentions the importance of community voices, yet Reform haven't engaged with the public at all on this, their preferred option. That is a shame. It's also a shame that they've chosen to champion an option which has the potential to further reduce local voice and also, compared to the other options, minimise residents' representation. Maintaining a council presence in the community is important, but how is that presence going to be maintained in New Mills, for example? We've lost our care home, we've lost our adult ed centre, we've lost our day centre, and the only visible and visitable DCC presence that remains in this historic market town is now our small Tier 4 library. Throughout the paper, you can almost hear the Reform mantra of save money, save money, save money, but to what real cost? All of these four options will save money, but the other options put more emphasis on highlighting local voice and local democracy, important aspects any council should aim to protect. A unitary council of 1.1 million is too large to effectively hear all its community's voices. We risk losing residents being heard and losing the voice of local democracy with this option. The Reform Group's focus has been on saving money. Yes, save where you can, but not to the point of losing much needed services or severely damaging local democracy. It is a shame you didn't ask stakeholders about this option. A shame you have championed an option that reduces local voice, and it's a shame that you appear to put cost cutting above all else. No one ever said democracy comes cheap, but it is worth both paying for and fighting for. I will not be supporting this option. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Fordham, please.
Thank you, Chair. I was unable to be at the briefing. I was handling a family bereavement, but so apologies for not having had the advantage of that. The leader, I think, mentioned William Wallace. I wasn't expecting a Derby City Councillor to invoke the arrival of the Scots in 1745 in Derby as the basis for local government reform, but it seems here we are. When having read this report, the bit that stands out is not what it says, but what it doesn't say. I can't see the schedule of meetings of chief executives of all of the local authorities. I can't see the leaders of all the authorities getting together. I can't see the unsuccessful vote that the leader clearly will have pushed for with all the other leaders of the councils of Derbyshire. He talks about town and parish councillors, clearly unaware that swathes of the county don't have either. We can't work alone. I've never known the county feel so isolated. If you look at the services we provide, we are at risk of fiddling while Rome burns. Today, the government has announced the abolition of the police and crime commissioners, giving the power to the mayor. We're now pushing for a one Derbyshire. There is, to be fair, Councillor Major had some bravery and some gall about him. When we discussed this last, the deputy leader then lost his seat, Councillor Spencer, said, one Derbyshire, but it was one Derbyshire minus Derby. And you would break Derbyshire over his dead body, clearly unaware that the capital of Derbyshire had been taken out some decades before. But the issue is not how big a boundary can we draw. The issue is how effective can we make local services. You will literally, as a resident, be 1,000,000 to 1 in this authority. Do you think it's hard trying to get through the switchboard here now? We are barely scratching the surface, and I will support Councillor Major. He mentioned one councillor who was never ever going to go in with Derby City. I think I've got screenshots of 9 of them to date, sitting on the reform benches, who never, over my dead body, will we merge with Derby. Well, it seems we're at that day. I'll be watching those 9 votes carefully today to see if the 9 of you who declare never to go with Derby City break that pledge today. If you start to read the report, there's a certain disingenuousness to it. Background 2.1 on the 9th of July 2025. This started long before that. All of the reports that we considered in the previous quadrennium, all detail in-depth conversation between ministers and other councils. They're all whitewashed over in this. Following discussions there, 2.3, the preferred option. What about the viable option? It's all very well having a preference, but if it's not going to stand up financially, if it's not going to stand up with the democratic structures, the council approved a period of key stakeholder engagement. We just left out the other councils. We just didn't really talk to them. They've been meeting all along. We just decided to absent chair. The council's proposal was informed by local views. Given the residents are opposed to the plans you're putting forward, given lots of them don't want to go with the city, given they don't want to go north-south, how were you informed? Did you hear what they said and do the opposite? District and borough councils and Derby City Council carried out separate public engagement on the options they're considering. How damning. You want to bring the county, the city, and all the districts and boroughs together, and you did everything separately. That's not collaboration. That's just arrogant takeover or an attempt to. Do you really believe this is an option? Have you sat down with those ministers, those civil servants, and gone, actually, This is going to happen. If you then look at 2.9, I think it is, the better outcomes implementation commitment, we had the precise reverse list about 4 months ago. You can almost take the report and flip it from better outcomes to worse outcomes. It's almost word for word, but in reverse. It's almost tragic to read it. This is about local government reorganisation, but it's also about what local government delivers. There is an opportunity, a real opportunity to dictate how we present local government. If you look at the finances in Appendix B, it's all about the money saving. I get the money saving, but I think many of us, and look at your own Facebook posts and public engagement, we talk about having youth services, about having safer streets, about having better parks. They're all non-statutory. They'll be gone. In the price and financial pressures that this report lists, none of those areas are mentioned. All those museums and art funds, community projects, they'll go. There'll be 500 quid here and there to scrap around, but they get swept aside. All the experience of local government up and down the country, England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, says one large council like this does not work. It's a lovely design for a consultant, but for the residents, for the communities, you are essentially, and I don't mean this with any cruel judgment, you're a new political party, you have a chance to articulate something different. Saying we're going to take the Labour and Tory plans and squeeze it a bit tighter and then make it bigger, that strikes me as a betrayal of the hopes you were elected under. I just don't understand. When you have smaller local government, it can be more effective, it can take more time, but the parks can be much stronger, the museums can be bolder and more and have greater outreach. You can do engagement with schools in a way you currently cannot, and in this plan will become worse. We come down to what are the chances of this succeeding? To what extent do we believe that this plan, when it is voted through today, will go before the government and the civil servants, and they'll see the plan from the other districts and boroughs, and they'll say, actually, this one that's just appeared on the table, actually, gosh, no one had thought of that. Let's have a vast super council. The issue previously was that Derbyshire, without the city, was too big. The government was pushing for a smaller option then. So what we're going to do, we're pushing for a smaller option, and then let's look at one that's even bigger. How realistic do you think that is? Or is this a plan that is designed to fail? Are you going to push so hard on this plan that when the government say no, you'll say, it was the wicked Labour government? If you play that game, you're playing with people's lives and jobs. Because actually, when it comes to the list of financial pressures and opportunities, staff reduction is listed as number one. You look at Appendix B in detail, number one, staff reduction. I really don't think it's credible to come here with a plan that has not been agreed with the other local authorities, that has not been discussed with the other leaders. Not a phone call, not a text, not a WhatsApp message, not even a leaked document. And say, actually, we have united the people of Derbyshire around this. William Wallace, faced with a huge hegemony or a takeover of council, would have shouted freedom and sod off, frankly. In Gaelic, I'm sure. He would not have advocated for this. And what happened to him? Torn to 4 parts and scattered across the country. If we, in Tolkien's Legendarium, there's a character, a fairly obscure character called Mim the Petty Dwarf. He rules a vast kingdom, and all underground, and they burrow for the mines and the gems, and they find huge amounts of money. But unaware of the changing culture, but there are other plans afoot, and above him, above ground, other kingdoms are established and take over. And he's left, named the Petty Dwarf for his skill in jewellery, but remembered as the petty dwarf who achieved nothing because his concerns were too small. I fear this plan is not realistic. I fear it is not designed to change the mind of the government. I fear it is designed to put it on a collision course with the government. And that is what I fear it will do. The districts and the boroughs don't necessarily have the best plan. I'm not sure I like that either. But if we're going to put forward a comprehensive plan, then we should advocate for town and parish councils across the spectrum. If we're going to have a localised council, then we should have a structure that gives area committees within that. None of that is articulated here, none of those opportunities. If we're going to have savings in expenditure, then we should be saying, what do we do with that money? How do we reinvest it? How do we make it more sustainable? How do we pick up those non-statutory areas of leisure and tourism and more that are all left out of the current plan? We get to vote on this. I hope it's a named vote, because I really think those of you who will never ever go in with the city were perhaps a little foolish in those words, and you're about to be flushed out in public. I think those of us who live in parts of the county that are not Derby, that are not Matlock, that are not, it's going to be tough. Where does the centre end up being? Back in Derby? I'm not sure Chesterfield's that keen on an option whereby if you have a problem, you can walk into the town hall, but in future, it will be a coach, bus or train ride or a drive with yet more cars. There is a tradition in Derbyshire, a slightly ghostly tradition, where bad plans go awry. And sometimes we have to bite the bullet. Sometimes we have to decide on an option that we don't like. I happen to think unity government is not entirely a bad thing. It's a personal view of mine, but I think it has merit. But to do it on such a scale as to make your voice 1,000,000 to 1 is not local government. That is small national government. You end up running on contracts and diktat, and I think that's a shame. I think there is a risk that this plan will just sink. I think we'll have wasted time, we'll have had this meeting, we won't have engaged with the other boroughs, we'll just look silly, frankly. And I think that's a missed opportunity for the county and for yourselves. I think you had the chance to bring forward something that was not a vision so big, but a vision so strong that it enhanced communities, invested in services, protected services, and tackled the problems we see day to day and week by week. The village of Shopton is famous in Derbyshire. It still stands today in part.
Councillor Fordham, that's
I'm going to the end. I'm on my
10
last
minutes.
I'll finish my sentence, Chair.
Thank you.
But it is remembered as the village that was swept away by the greater good. I hope this plan is swept away, because the greater good is not a bigger council. The greater good is better local government, and that is not this plan.
Thank you. And Councillor Dale, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think we all appreciate that all of us have different views around this room, and on that basis, I don't think personally it should be a party political matter, and certainly our group will be having a free vote, and I'd hope that all other groups around the chamber will have a free vote, so every member can actually honestly have their say on this, and I think that's really important. This is a matter of conscience, it's not a matter of party politics. And I want to actually be clear on the outset that my view is, and giving credit where credit is due, I think this proposal is actually better than the Labour District and Borough's kind of chaotic north-south carve-up. At least this option avoids splitting communities, it avoids the disaggregation of services, and it avoids some of the worst of the administrative mess that Labour locally want to create. But just because it's better than Labour's alternatives doesn't mean that it's good, and it certainly doesn't mean it's what's right for Derbyshire. And yes, the savings presented here are larger and closer to the whole county model that we originally proposed, excluding the city, which in my view was large enough to achieve savings, but not so large that it would be too distant from communities, and it would represent a council that residents already recognise as a county council basis, on a county council basis. But that proposal, as I say, excluded the city, and in my opinion, that model was genuinely deliverable, it was coherent, and it was financially stable. And I'm struck by the scale of the savings proposed in this report and how theoretical they are. They rely on some pretty heroic assumptions and having perfect implementation. And we know that all major reorganisations like this very, very rarely deliver all the savings that they set out to on paper. And let's be honest, even if the savings were actually realised, residents won't see a penny of it. We know that Rachel Reeves is going to come in and hoover up all the headroom, as she's so famously done already. Any space that's created will be used to prop up the government's own failing finances, and residents won't see council tax come down. Services aren't suddenly going to improve, and the Treasury is definitely going to pocket the difference. And we're told that bigger is more efficient. Well, really, all you have to do is look at the EU or the NHS to demonstrate that that's not always the case. Bigger organisations become harder to manage, more distant from the public, and more expensive to run. For me, personally, a unitary of 1.1 million is not just too big, it's one of the largest in the country and just would not be viable for the people of Derbyshire. And there's a genuine question as to whether an organisation of that size can possibly remain responsive, agile and resident focused. But there's another really big problem with this proposal, and that's the mismatch of joining a largely rural and market town county with a very urban city. And rural Derbyshire and urban Derby City are fundamentally very, very different places. They have different economies, they have different transport needs, they have different health inequalities, and they have extremely different demographics. To pretend that they could be neatly stitched together into one homogenised unit is complete fantasy. And I worry deeply, and I know many residents do too, about Derby City dominating the new council. With a much denser population, concentrated electoral power and vastly different spending pressures, and the pool of deprivation and high-cost services, all of those resources from around the county being sapped into dealing with Derby City's problems. And ultimately, rural and market town Derbyshire is going to be sidelined. And it's not lost on me either that all of this is being led by a long-standing Derby City councillor, our musical conductor over here. There is not a shred of convincing evidence that our residents will receive better services as a result of this. There's a much stronger argument that they will receive more diluted services, more remote services and slower responses. A mega council is not the same as a more effective council. So lots of us here may have many very different views, and I think actually a lot of the Reform councillors here don't like this proposal and would happily vote against it, but will be whipped into voting for it. And I really hope that you vote with your conscience, as I've said earlier. But let's not actually pretend that this is even a real decision before us tonight. Ultimately, this is a cabinet decision anyway. And beyond that, the whole exercise is being carried out by a rotten Labour government that will ignore local voices the moment it suits them. They'll do whatever they want, whether we vote for or against this recommendation. And they've already shown their hand nationally. Centralisation, control and Whitehall knows best. So forgive me if I don't take seriously the idea that they're sitting down in London eagerly awaiting our views. And let's be honest about politics. The model that we originally supported, a whole county unitary without Derby City, is no longer on the table. And that's why I can't support this recommendation before us today. That was a Conservative view, it was coherent, it was manageable and it was deliverable. And with that option removed, as I say, I cannot support the proposal before us. So yes, it's better than Labour's disaggregation and north-south stitch-up, but it's not good for Derbyshire. It's not good for our rural communities, and it's not what Conservative councillors have always argued for. If we want real reform, real efficiency, real value for money, we need a model that respects Derbyshire's predominantly rural identity, protects services, and leaves Derby City to manage its own affairs. That isn't this proposal, and that's why I'm voting against it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wheeldon, please.
Thank you, Chair. The cost nationally of this exercise was estimated in the White Paper at £400 million. This government's folly will slow down housing, highways, repair, delivery, send services and many excellent services this council delivers now. Fundamentally, this would take the local out of local government. I stated at this council in July we were turkeys voting for Christmas, the need for integrity and to stand up for what is right for our residents and how awful this will be for our staff. Residents need to know our hands are tied, we want to stay as we are and that we are being dragged kicking and screaming with no choice to make this decision. It beggars belief our own South Derbyshire MP voted for this when South Derbyshire residents who responded to the surveys from districts and county do not want this. Both the district and county council networks do not support this and now state there will be no savings as pensions were not properly considered. It is flawed at every level. This will lead through council tax harmonisation to a disproportionate increase in council tax for the residents of South Derbyshire, worse service delivery, and as I said, it takes the local out of local government. There are negative impacts. Derbyshire is 2,703 kilometres squared. A single unitary would make it the 6th largest unitary geographically and second only to Birmingham by population at 1.1 million, and almost double the size of any county unitary council created recently since 2008. there will be a massive 74% democratic deficit and reduction in councillors across Derbyshire. And with many Derbyshire residents living in rural areas, this will have a negative impact on them. It is possible at this stage to identify specific impacts for people in rural communities. Hard-working officers only engaged the consultants for this report on the 29th of August of this year. We cannot be expected to support this and I believe it is not in the best interests of the people of Derbyshire for this council to end. Will councillors join me in my response to government by signing a letter pointing out in the strongest terms that Derbyshire residents have made patently clear they do not wish to be merged with any other local authority? If this does proceed, it will be against the expressed wishes of those who elected us. Parties do not elect us, residents do. Our role is to represent residents. History will record through the proposed letter, a copy of which will be deposited with the council, those councillors who have added their name to it and those who have not. We owe it to our residents not to roll over and admit defeat. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Greenhill, please.
Thank you, Chair. So obviously this subject matters deeply to a lot of people in Derbyshire. At its heart, it's about place, and that's the most powerful thing I've come across in local government, people's connection to place. Now, I'll be honest, there are lots of strengths to the two-tier system. County councils like ours bring scale, resources, especially those really important services like highways, education, social care. On the other hand, our district borough councils, close to the ground, and providing those local services that communities see more often day to day and really care about. And they're often that first port of call, and there's value in the partnership between the two. But let's not pretend it's always clear cut. I'm a twin hatter, have been for a number of years, and I've lost count of the number of times that residents come to me with an issue, potholes, bus shelters, bin collections, only to find that they've been sent to the wrong council, or they're being bounced between councils on issues. Sorry, that's not us, it's this council, it's that council. And you can see the frustration. And it's not their job to understand the intricacies of the local government arrangements, and it's ours as politicians and officers to make them better. So the principle of moving to a unitary model has real merit. A well-designed unitary structure can deliver that: more joined-up decision-making, less duplication, better value for money. And this is crucial, how we achieve that matters. The proposal for a single unitary authority covering all of Derby and Derbyshire would create, as many people have mentioned, one of the largest councils in Europe, serving over 1.1 million people. And under current government guidance, councils are capped at around 100 elected members. That means that every councillor would be representing 10,000 residents or more. As a county council, I represent that, but they're having 5 district and borough councillors working in that area. So that's not effective representation. It risks creating a more remote, more centralised body that feels out of touch with the communities that we're elected to serve. Now, we all know Derbyshire isn't this one homogenised area, as other speakers have mentioned. It's a county of contrasts, from the city of Derby to rural areas like where I serve in High Peak, from market towns to former coal mining communities. Local identity matters. People want decision made by people who understand their area, not in a council chamber that could be 50 miles away. People feel disconnected from this council, 35 miles from where I live in Glossop. And yes, the financial case for a single unitary looks the strongest of the options on paper, with those 100 million over 5 years, 45. But democracy is not just about the balance sheet. It's about the voice. It's about accountability and trust. If we sacrifice those for efficiency, we'll pay the price in the long run. And that's why I think there is a better route in a unitary model that does protect local identity and representation. And I think of those, I've seen 2 authorities for the whole area on a north and south basis. I think there's different views as to where the lines are drawn on that, but that would still simplify the governance. It would still deliver savings, but it wouldn't create this very large mega council that risks alienating residents. As councillors, it's our job not to rubber stamp the easiest decision or the one that might be in a political interest or whatever it might be driving individuals' decisions, but it's to shape the future that works for the people we represent. So, I mean, I certainly reject the idea of a single unitary for Derby and Derbyshire. think, as others have said, bigger isn't always better, and I really think that local matters.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Ford, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. As it seems to be a day for bringing out historical figures, I'm going to bring out one. Oscar Wilde. If you believe the Oscar Wilde quote about somebody who knows the value, what did he say? What is a cynic? A man who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. Now, but for me, the price of nothing isn't nothing at all. The price for me is exactly what this quote goes on to say. And it says the quote is frequently cited to critique modern trends in business, marketing and consumerism, where a focus on cost-cutting and profit can lead to evaluation of quality, relationships and genuine worth. Now, for me as a dual hatter, sitting in South Derbyshire, that's the value to me, is localism. Absolutely, we cannot let this particular business model go ahead and see South Derbyshire and other districts and boroughs be swallowed up and be taken over by, and it will be taken over by Derby City in whichever form it takes. And I'm going to be able to hold my head up high by voting against this. But when I walk through the streets of Swaddlingcote and Melbourne and Repton and all our rural areas, I can say, no, I didn't support it and I will never support it. The model that we presented through Councillor Dale and the Cabinet in the previous administration, that the donut effect, which was the whole county, less Derby City, would keep Derby City involved in itself and allow the rest of the districts and boroughs to carry on around them, delivering quality services as it should have been done anyway. But unfortunately, we've got to vote for this. Last week at District Council, the Labour leader semi-admitted that it was very unpopular, but we'd got what we got and he felt that we had to vote for it. Is that right, Councillor Wilton? So, you know, it's almost like Labour people don't want it. Reform, I'm not quite sure if they don't actually understand it, but I know certainly our group certainly don't want it and I certainly will not be supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hart, please.
Thank you, Chairman. How divisive is this whole unitary business? I believe all the districts and boroughs have now voted. I may be wrong, there may be one that hasn't, but Derby City has, and we're voting today, and none of them have agreed. It's not been unanimous at any of the meetings. It's so divisive, it's not true. I'm biased. Some of you know I was deputy leader and for 10 years at Derbyshire Borough Council, and then the first female leader for 6 years at Derbyshire Borough Council. I think we did a fantastic job, and I'm very partial. I think the local districts and boroughs do a good job. Now, I'm not saying that we couldn't do things in a better way. There may be better ways of working in partnership, and that could save some money. Nobody's denying that. But surely that would be a far simpler way of doing some work on the districts and boroughs and working together than this whole divisive thing about unitaries. There's been some feedback. I know there's not been consultation, but the feedback that's come back has been mainly on what was proposed originally of the two, the south and north from here. The full massive unitary has only come out late, so I don't know what the feedback from that has been. But the leader is saying that people seem very much in favour of it. Well, I'd like to invite the leader to come and visit my ward. Out of 6 parishes, 5 of them are on the Derby City boundary. And I can tell you the feedback and the lobbying I've had, please don't merge us with Derby City. They may be in touching distance. They can actually reach and touch the border, but they've got there's nothing that helps, that integrates with the rural parishes and the Derby City. The demographics, as has been pointed out already, are totally different. And they may be very, very close neighbours, but we have nothing in common. So, as I say, I've been lobbied and I will support my residents. They don't want this. They don't want to join with Derby City. So I'll definitely be voting against this. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. And Councillor Gourlay, please. Can you turn your mic on, please? No, I'm broke. Don't worry.
No one who lives outside Derby will choose voluntarily to chain themselves to that hopeless pit of despair. The city centre will suck the money
Apparently it's
out
not
of
on.
my... It is on. The city centre will suck the money out of my neighbours' pockets and cast it into a bottomless hellhole. Now, I've talked to various reform backbenchers. There is no enthusiasm amongst reform councillors for this. And you can tell there are 6 reform councillors missing. In any other circumstances, we would say they don't want to be here for this vote. They want to avoid voting for this issue because they dislike it so much. But in the case of reform councillors, it could just be that they want to stay at home.
Or resign next week.
The reform councillors I've spoken to say there are no solutions, only trade-offs. There are no easy choices. This is the least worst option. This is a fit of relativism that I did not expect from the Common Sense Party.
Can we allow the councillor to speak and without interventions or amusing anecdotes or whatever you interject?
I've also heard,
Thank you.
well, it doesn't matter what we decide. Now, that's not even relativism, that's nihilism. They don't care what they're here to vote on. We have to go along with LGR in order to influence the decision. Well, you seem to be going along with the decision to throw my neighbour's money into Derby, the decision to release planning regulations on the city, to allow building in Ashbourne, in Amber Valley, Erewash and South Derbyshire. It doesn't seem like the persona that Reform was projecting at the May elections. What Reform said then was that they were the Common Sense Party. They were in opposition to pretentious theories of the elites. They wanted to trust your gut. They wanted straightforward and obvious policies. Well, given the silence of Reform councillors today, none of you are standing up and supporting this. It seems to me that you too believe that this is a calculating policy, a sophisticated policy, too clever by half. And the only person in this room whose residents will benefit from it is City Councillor Alan Graves. There are two words that I could say to anyone from Amber Valley, Erewash, South Derbyshire, or the southern part of Derbyshire Dales, and they would fill in their own reasons to hate this policy. And those two words are Greater Derby. Now, to explain your policy to them would take a 15-minute YouTube video. It is not easy to explain. It is an uncharacteristic Reform policy. And I can see you all hate it. Why are you voting for it? If we are to look within Derbyshire for an example of a unitary authority, there is one. It's Derbyshire Police. And when I go to a senior police officer and say, why isn't there a policeman in Chapel on Frith on a Friday or the Saturday night? He tells me because there are murders and rapes in Derby. It's an impossible situation to argue against because it's the truth. Derby City is an insatiable thirst for taxpayers' money. If we were to look at the indexes or the indices of deprivation 2025, published on the government website only 2 weeks ago, I looked through that to try to find any areas where Derby City was not more deprived than the rest of Derbyshire. I couldn't find them. In any social policy that the new unitary authority carries through, any rational policy would target your neighbour's council tax towards Derby City. It is a monstrous baby, sucking every last drop of mother's milk from the teat of the Derbyshire taxpayer. Vote with your conscience. Vote against this policy that only serves one man.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kinsella, please.
Follow that. I quite like Derby. You know, I think I do think it's a nice city with potential. So it's a shame, but there you go. Yeah, I mean, I think there are some real challenges here, and I think it's been difficult to come to a conclusion. I know, listening to a lot of the speakers, it would appear very binary and the decisions are obvious. But for us as Greens, it's about whether we be pragmatic or whether we be principled about this. And I have some sympathy for reform on this, because this has been handed to them by a national government. It wasn't set out in any manifesto. You know, it hasn't been a democratic decision that people have voted on. We've just been handed this bureaucratic nightmare, and there's no evidence at all that it can be delivered in such a short space of time. It's a dangerous experiment that is likely to fail. And I agree with Councillor Hart. You know, if we wanted to, yes, we have these challenges around. For example, this week, someone contacted me about a pathway. The pathway was full of rubbish. He contacted the county, because the county is responsible for pathways. Of course they are. But no, it's the borough that's responsible for clearing the pathway. So I got that cleared on his behalf. But you can see the kind of the challenges that people face around kind of this. Is it the county's function? Is it the district's function? So there clearly is a challenge there. But is this the solution to that? I mean, can't we live maybe with a little bit of where it doesn't work exactly the way we want it to work? Because basically what we've got a form of democracy, and a really good form of democracy. People have already said about we're losing 75% of our councillors, and I disagree with Councillor Graves when he talks about getting rid of more politicians. You know, you take that to its ultimate conclusion, you've got Putin's Russia. Now, I know Farage is a fan of Putin, but that's not kind of where I'd want to be. Sorry, can I finish without being interrupted? So,
order, please.
Thank you. So my biggest challenge is, and again, I refer back to Councillor Hart there, where she said, you know, there are other ways of looking at this. And kind of one of the biggest challenges we face is how we fund local government and how we value a decentralised nation. We have become more and more centralised. We've become more focused on Westminster. Powers are taken away increasingly. Even when we have MCA, there is clear influence from national government about how they want that doing. So if you look at European countries around that level of decentralisation and that level of autonomy that states and principalities have, we haven't got that here. And that's something that we want to achieve. And this proposal just doesn't achieve that at all. My key objection, so why don't we look at funding local government properly? Why don't we look at, before we start getting this messy bureaucratic beer moth, why don't we look at looking at council tax reform? Valuations, based on the 1991 valuations, you know, that is inequitable. and it's unfair, and it leads to poor councils having no money to spend. So why don't, if we're going to do radical reform, why don't we look at the funding of local authorities? Because largely, a lot of what the government wants us to do, it's about funding. And I just pick up on Councillor Fordham's point there about statutory services. Statutory services will suck the life out of local government. That will basically be, and of course, I can't remember who made the point, but about, I think it was Councillor Dale, about the Labour Treasury, or the government's Treasury, will just basically say, thank you very much. They will take that surplus and that will go back into the pot. So these savings, we talk about them, but they are theoretical. We won't see them achieved, and we won't see them being spent on the people of Derbyshire. And I know, just to echo again, I know councillors have spoken around kind of the size of this authority. Yes, it is huge. And I think Councillor made the point, it's as big as Birmingham. Now, as a Brummie, as someone who's worked for Birmingham City Council, delivering significant projects, I know that is a failing authority. And I beg you, please don't go down that road. I have looked, and I've worked in Birmingham City Council. I have seen how those organisations fail. I have seen how projects collapse in on themselves because that authority is too big. And we see the state it's in at the moment, and it's failing the people of Birmingham. It's an absolute disgrace. So please do not adopt this model. So finally, I'd just like to make a couple of comments. One is about the area committees. And I think what we had in the briefing was, that's a conversation to be had. That's not good enough for me. That's a conversation to be had about democracy at the grassroots level. That is not good enough for me. It's not a conversation to be had. It's something that we need to make sure that people have their democratic rights, that they have elected councillors representing them, knowing their areas and representing people and fighting hard for them. This reduces massively, and it allows the administration, it allows that cabinet a much freer, a much less scrutinised, a much less accountable approach. And surely, you know, we've spoken directly to reform members. That is surely something that you don't want to see happen. So for those reasons, and I have to say as well, my final point really is, what a brilliant paper. What an absolute brilliant paper. I mean, it's like the officer has, and the officer has done a fantastic job on it. It's like they've been given an answer and they've had to retrofit the question. It's just absolutely brilliant. You know, it's so creative. I really have to congratulate the officer in coming forward with those arguments. So for all of those reasons, this is not something that I can support.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Foster, please.
Thank you, sir. Actually, everything that I'm going to say has been said already, and it won't be as entertaining as Councillor Gawley has put it. But I've told my residents that I would come and represent them on this issue. And I'm really disappointed that we've not heard from any of the reform councillors on this matter and what their residents have told them about this specific option, because I would like to have heard that, and I'm sure the residents will have expected that from them, unless they all have their speech ready for after we finish speaking ourselves. I'll just summarise some of the things that my residents have said, but certainly other councillors, parish councillors, town councillors as well, and we know of districts, so some of it has been, it won't be new to all of you, but the fear that I'm bringing forward, the concerns that I'm bringing forward, is a real concerns for our communities, much more than political, ambitions or anything like that. It's real concerns for our local communities. I became a councillor because, to me, localism was a really big thing when I joined, and it was really important. It was giving a voice to those very local communities, and often those people who are very, very seldom heard, very, very seldom have the confidence to come forward, and we speak on their behalf. That's what it's important that we hear and speak up when we agree or disagree with something. That's very important to me. And I disagree with Councillor Alan Gray. It's not less politicians that we need, it's more politicians that are willing to actually come and speak up on behalf of their residents, read the papers, make their decisions,
and come here in this chamber and voice the concerns of their residents, because I'm sure many of you will have heard from their local residents expressing concerns about that, unless you're not out and about enough. I'm not saying you are, but unless you're not out and about enough, you will have heard these concerns. So really important. The concern that has been expressed, the loss of local voice, we've heard this today, the democratic distance that this option will bring. People have expressed fear of the single large council, which will feel remote and weaken local representation. And we're talking about, the parish and the town council taking on some more responsibilities. But we've heard, and that is true, some areas of Derbyshire don't have local parish and town councils. They don't have them. I'm lucky, I'm in Johnsville, I've got one. Killamarsh, we've got one. They do fantastic work. But don't forget that they rely on the voluntary work from local councillors. None of the local parish and town councillors are paid. So basically, we will be asking these volunteers to take on more responsibilities, more work. And frankly, most parishes and town councils that I know of, and I've visited many in Derbyshire under different hats, don't have the capacity to take on those responsibilities. So it's not an option that is viable, in my view. So the other concern that has been expressed is the idea of having a one-size-fits-all when it comes to policy making. Once this big council is created, that will ignore the local differences. And we've talked about the differences between the communities in Derby City, communities in Derbyshire, which are relatively rural in many areas of Derbyshire. We know that completely different interests, different ambitions, different ways of working, and different needs. I'll not repeat some of the concerns that have been expressed by Councillor Gawley, but you know what I mean when we talk about Derby City having some different needs to the rest of Derbyshire. Concerns about the democratic mandate, it's been mentioned before, the lack of public consent. I don't think that this option was part of the manifesto put forward by the Reform Party locally, but also that the option has been subject to much consultation from the public. It's just been decided and put forward. I don't know where it comes from, actually. It was quite a surprise when we heard about it. And we know that a lot of people have asked for that public consultation and have asked for their say on that specific option. The fear of reduced responsiveness for rural areas, now that's something that we mentioned. I'll not cover it again in detail, but we know that when you have large councils, very often those who are suffering the most are the rural areas. So in terms of transport, broadband and local services, there certainly will become a lower priority compared to the more urban areas like Derby City, for example. And finally, just to mention about something that's been mentioned about the savings that have been calculated and who will benefit from the savings. That's been covered already, but I have a lot of skepticism over whether the promised savings will actually materialize locally and who will actually benefit from those savings. And I've got experience as a Police and Crime Commissioner, which was, the Police and Crime Commissioner has Derby City and Derbyshire as a co-terminus with the Derbyshire Police Authority. So therefore, I've seen firsthand how Derby City has really pumped resources time and time again from the taxpayers. And while I was as a Police and Crime Commissioner, when I first took the role, the amount of resources that were spent in Derby City were nearly the same amount as it was in the rest of Derbyshire. And time again, I've heard, Chapel, why don't we have cover? Because Derby City has the cover, needs the cover. There's loads of villages around our Derbyshire area that are being neglected as we speak because the resources are being taken by Derby City. This will happen under this option. We cannot afford to have Derby City pumping our hard-earned cash, our residents' hard-earned cash, just to pay for their lack of hard work, ambition, etc. And I know we've got a Derby City Council. I think that's wrong. We shouldn't be representing the interests of Derby City here. I've spoken about that before, but that's really wrong. It shouldn't be leading you. I found that really, really upsetting as someone who was really Derbyshire interests at heart, really upsetting. So hopefully you will think twice about that next time you elect your leader.
Thank you, Councillor. And Councillor Burfoot, please.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I think I need to state that what we're being asked to do this evening is basically under instructions from the government and will be imposed on us whether we like it or not. But I think what we've been asked for, particularly tonight, is a clear centralisation of power and what I believe to be the decline of local democracy in this country, further removed from the public who we are there to serve. This proposal from reform is what I believe is the worst of all options. Councillor Graves talked about too many politicians. I have to respond to that. I may be a politician, but once elected, I am there to serve the community that I represent to the best of my ability. So what are we being offered? We're being offered fewer democratically elected representatives. I suspect there'll be fewer per head of population than any equivalent European democracy. A centralisation of power in a massive unitary authority. I do wonder whether there's been any independent cost analysis of the cost savings that's actually been done. I don't see any evidence that larger councils are more stable financially. I know it's been pointed out about Birmingham. We all know about Birmingham. I am here going to put a plug in for Derbyshire Dales District Council, of which I am a member. Derbyshire Dales District Council works well and has worked well, and in fact we get excellent support from our local residents, and that's on the record. I suspect that if we do have a whole Derbyshire authority at residence, when that authority takes power, I think they'll soon realise how remote their council will be. Now, I use an analogy of what happens at the moment. I am a member of Derbyshire Dales District Council. If somebody phones me up and says, for whatever reason, I can't get my bin emptied, I can't get it sorted out, I will know who to phone up at the District Council. It will get sorted. I'm afraid that people who call Derbyshire are not speaking to the officer. And in fact, I ought to say that most of the time, if a resident phones up Derbyshire Dales District Council, they will speak to the officer who can sort it out. It doesn't always have to come through a councillor. If you phone up Call Derbyshire, you're not speaking to the officer who deals with it. You'll get some kind of a reference, and you'll put the phone down and hope that something gets done. Now, I'm not blaming anybody, but once we get to a bigger authority, that will be even worse. Yep. I couldn't possibly sum up the issue of Derby City Council and what will happen better than Councillor Gourlay did, but what I will say is that I suspect Derby City Council will suck the blood out of the rest of us and will become a bottomless pit of funding. Finally, can I just say, we've heard from Councillor Graves. There are lots of Reform councillors here. I don't know whether there are the full complement of 42, but I want to hear from you. I want to hear you are going to vote for this. I want to hear why you are going to vote for this, because I certainly am not.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Gourlay, point of order only, please.
At the end of this debate, I'd call for a recorded vote.
We'll deal with that at the end.
Yeah, we will be dealing with that. Thank you. And next is Councillor Reid, please. Yes, sorry.
Sorry, is that better? Thank you. A couple of points that I'll address really quickly. Councillor Major talked about choice. I think it's an illusion to say that we have choice to even fight this, because as we know, the legislation about local government reorganisation is actually going through its second reading in Parliament now, and next year, those who don't actually participate, it will be forced upon them without any choice whatsoever, with no input whatsoever. Okay, so that's the first thing. The representation, everyone's talked about representation in this. Representation and the size of it, and I agree, local representation is important. I would say that the representation we have put forward as a county council within this is similar to what has been done in the other places. And we want to push for the maximum potentially possible because it is an important issue. All right? So that is another key point. It is comparable to what the other districts and boroughs have actually put through. Cost cutting. This isn't just about cost cutting to be efficient as a council and to save money for the financial bottom line. It's actually about cost cutting of bureaucracy. There are levels of bureaucracy and just hoops that people have to jump through in providing these services. And the money we save can be reinvested into more efficient, effective services which provide to our residents. And that's the whole purpose of the exercise. Now, I will caveat all of this, by the way, with saying I was never for LGR in the way that government is pushing across us. I've had multiple conversations with Alex Dale when I was sitting there as a Conservative. I've never changed my tune on this. Ed Fordham has heard me say this. Look, part of it is this. In a utopian society, and Ed, I'm a great Tolkien fan and fiction fan as well, and I would say this about these. These things in their abstract, in their utopia, are perfect if they can be done and executed well. What I have an issue is how Labor governments are forcing this upon councils to do it really quickly. And we have worked, I won't be Australian, very hard to make sure that we have looked at all options, because we did suggest looking at the north-south split. We did look at things going, we feel that would be a better option. The fact is, we changed our minds to what we feel is a better option, being this. And here's a couple of reasons why. One, and this is a key point for me, when you look at a north-south split, disaggregation of services becomes more effective, more costly, adds layers of bureaucracy that actually don't provide best value to our residents. Okay? And it is the right decision to say that is not the best option for Derbyshire. That's the first. Two, it became very apparent that the north of Derbyshire would become the poor cousin to the south of Derbyshire. The north had predominantly more deprivation, more dilapidation of infrastructure, and very little industry. I think the crown jewel of the north of Derbyshire would be the $2 billion a year quarry stone industry, which is under heavy threat by this Labor government and by High Peaks Council. So what happens? We become a transient workforce that supplies other areas. And I can see very quickly that within 1 decade or two, the north of Derbyshire would be broken up and swallowed up by the south of Derby, by Sheffield and South Yorkshire, by Greater Manchester, and then by Nottinghamshire. And it would cease to exist. This, as Alex Dale has for his past time in administration, is all about keeping Derbyshire together. And he knows very well that the donut option was not going to be accepted by government, so it is off the table. They have clearly written back many times and said, it's not going to be accepted by government, it's off the table. Come back and put forward an option that includes Derby City. I find it very interesting that members will say that this is all about Greater Derby. Well, I can get the argument on why you push it or spin it that way. If it was a north-south, fine. But when you're looking in the context of the whole of Derbyshire as a county and in one single unitary, actually, we're not joining Derby City, they're joining us. And their representation would be changed accordingly. It's about keeping, the whole of one Derbyshire is about keeping the identity of Derbyshire intact. It represents all of Derbyshire, and it does that, I think, in the best possible terms that we can submit. The other thing on local representation, I'd like to say this. One part of this interesting exercise for me was this. I agree with having local representation, but having effective local representation. Out of the current stand of all politicians or elected members within Derbyshire, no matter what level of local government, 6% of all local government budgetary spend is controlled by approximately 390 elected members. The rest of it falls here. So I'm all for effective local representation, but which is the right level of elected representation? Having, as Ed Fordham and Councillor Kinsella said, I find it myself this week agreeing with the Green Councillor twice in 1 week. I'm all for local government tax reform, but that's currently not on the table. And I agree with you. If we could come up with a magic system that actually reformed the local tax for local government, I would be favourable of it. But that isn't on the table. And to my mind, having almost 400 locally elected members controlling 6% of council spend That's not effective decision-making or representation over the rights and the spend and the value for what their citizens are voting for. So having a unitary where your vote goes further, that controls everything and keeping it together, that we don't diminish the identity of the North or the South, we're not beholden to Derby City. They have to come on equal terms. And Councillor Gawley, I appreciate your sentiments, but I do find it hard coming from up in High Peaks that you would be absorbed into Derby City. This is about Derbyshire's identity and keeping it together. I think, as I've said many times, I am not convinced in the way that government will execute that. But this is what our job is as elected members in this place. We have to do this because it's being forced upon us. If we don't choose to have a seat at the table and actually direct the conversation now, then next year it will be forced upon us with no input. And it is incumbent upon all of us elected, regardless of party, to make sure that the process as it moves forward is in the best interest, that we get government to execute it in the right way, that we are contributing and holding them to account along the way to make sure that they execute this properly. The savings that we achieve from this, and estimated savings, which have been done independently, are prudent. We could have gone a lot higher, but what we've gone for is what we really feel is achievable and deliverable, and we believe we can get more than. But all of this is to say, we are all accountable for delivering that, not just central government, but we have to do it. We have to play with the cards that have been dealt, and we have to choose how we want to play that hand. So regardless of our personal stance on whether we agree with LGR or not, I know the party hasn't, and most of us before have said we don't agree with it in its current form, we want to do it the right way. This has been looked at. We've looked at the 2 unitary options and everything else with that. And we have all come to the conclusion, some kicking, dragging, but we can see that this, by the way, is the best option for Derbyshire that we can put forward to government, that actually has our residents' interests in mind, that actually looks at all the local representation, that actually is sustainable moving into the future and provides value for money and does what we need to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tyrrell, please.
Some interesting speeches, really. I won't even touch on the speech where one councillor was waffling about dwarves or Lord of the Rings or whatever. I can't really keep track with that one, but the rest of them, I do understand your sentiments, and I do agree, like many of you, that local government reorganisation isn't a good idea. However, we've got to emphasise that this is forced upon us by this local government, Labour government, which is doing a terrible job, and quite frankly, we've got to make a decision as a council. Do we want to sit at the adult table and push forward a vision for our county, or do we want to be relegated to the kids' table and having decisions forced upon us by, as we know, which is already an inept Labour government? And I think this deal is much better than the previous deal. So as a member for Council of Sodcote West in South Derbyshire, the previous deal would have kept us locked with the city all alone and the debts that came with it. However, this new deal, one council, one county, we're all coming in together. We're all bearing all the debts and the weight of it all as one county, one big community. And quite frankly, I'm not willing to take any chances to leave it with this terrible Labour government to draw boundaries and split communities and bear rules with a massive burden all alone. I think it's all good, certain councillors, criticising the deal, when they're all the way up in the high peaks, and they wouldn't have to contend with Derby City and all the debts that come with it. I think it makes more sense that, we're one county, we're one community, we're one people, and we should be treated as such. And I think I'm really happy with this this change. As I say, I wish local government reorganisation was happening at all. Residents aren't happy, but we've got to do the best with what we've got ultimately. And it's all good criticising, certain deals, but when you're not having to make these tough choices, that's the luxury you have. But we don't have that luxury, unfortunately. And as far as the city goes, I used to live in Borrowash before I lived in South Derbyshire, and it's not in the city at all, you're right. However, Spondon is in the city, and quite frankly, you know, going across the border into the city, they aren't as different as a lot of people like to say the city is. I mean, you know, I have family members, friends that lived in the city, that lived outside the city, went to school in and out, and quite frankly, a lot of times you won't be able to tell the difference. I think it is some big paranoid, ranting delusions from a lot of councillors trying to scare people about this deal. I feel like I'm going on, so thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Councillor McGuinness, please.
So I find it very difficult to hear the Lib Dems and Labour talk about democracy when they tried to cancel the biggest vote this country's ever seen in June 2016. And I can't believe the utter arrogance of the Conservative group for making fun of Reform councillors for resigning when they lost their only newly elected Conservative councillor. And a lot of that was to do with that arrogance, to be quite honest with you. You know, and of course, the Conservative plan was one big council as well, wasn't it? And Councillor Hart talks about being divisive. Now, what I think was divisive, and I came out against this very publicly in January 2025, and you know what's coming, is that they tried to cancel the local elections. They were so confident in themselves. And I was threatened with deselection. And you did. I'll give you that. And on this issue, this was the one issue we agreed on, I think.
Order, please.
So they argued. So the Conservative group argued, of course, you can't trust Reform. You know, they're inexperienced. Look at us. We're the Conservatives. We've been here for decades and decades and decades. They've got about 500 years between them. Most of us have only got 5 minutes. You know, but the issue is, they don't understand. The issue is that we have all experienced their experience. Derbyshire have experienced their experience. And what did we experience? We experienced crumbling roads. We experienced, it's to do with how inept the DCC group were. So we experienced the crumbling roads. We experienced send services and chaos. We experienced trying to introduce mad 20-mile-per-hour zones 24/7, which Councillor Major and Councillor Hart knew very well that I came out against as well, because I wasn't a Lib Dem.
Can we give the councillor the courtesy of listening to him? It was given to you.
The problem is I had this for years. This is the issue. And they also give us diversity officers for 60 grand a year, which is another thing I came out against. And Councillor Hart said, we just have to accept it. We just have to accept it. So they did such a good job. They did such a good job that they wanted to cancel the elections. And, you know, LGR has been enforced upon us, as everyone has acknowledged. But I don't think we should be taking any lectures from those who try to cancel democracy nationally and those who try to cancel democracy locally.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Somerville, please.
Which I haven't come after Councillor McGuinness there. I just a few points. I've got empathy for lots of the councillors in the room. I know, obviously, as we've got a district council and a county council, and if you're on both those hustles, then it's double the money. But and it's obviously going to damage that for you. So I've got a lot of empathy for that. I found it very interesting the Conservatives talk about big government, considering they left us with a government that's consuming 48% of everything, record taxation, record size, record control over everything in this country when they left in 2024. Also, back to Councillor McGuinness's point, I heard there was dancing in County Hall when you had the opportunity with the LGR to cancel the election. So, you know, any kind of talk of democracy or, you know, how undemocratic this is, for a party that's trying to cancel elections, yeah, that you've got no right, you've got no moral authority. What I found very interesting is, from the Conservatives, is they sounded a lot like the Liberal Democrats, buttering both sides of the bread. There's no point in doing this from some councillors, and other councillors saying that this had this sort of atomic sort of effect sort of thing, but it's completely untrue. And I've heard district councillors in Bolsover, Labour councillors, saying how they want, with the two county solution to merge Derby, and it's basically effective to grow the boundaries of Derby. So I'm well aware of that. This will give us a more opportunity to fight against that as we go forward. And ultimately, what the Conservatives want to do with this, the donut model, would do the exact same thing as cancelling our vote this year would have done. It would have robbed Derbyshire of their voice. It robbed us our ability to talk at the same table, because it would have offered a solution that the Labour government 100% would have turned down. Again.
It's not.
But this gives us the opportunity to engage better, and that's why I stood for county, because I wanted to make better choices rather than just playing politics. That's all you're doing, is playing politics with people's lives and pretending that when you know well that that will be turned down. Okay, so that's what reform's about. It's about common sense. That's what we talked about, common sense. It's about us making the best decision we possibly could.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Snowden, please.
Thank you, Chair. I will try and keep this fairly short because time's going on. And there have also been a lot of good points made around the chamber on various aspects of this. I will try and avoid any ranting delusions or any mention of dwarfs as well to keep it short. My reasons for voting against this, and I will be voting against this one as well, is the issue of local democracy. In none of these plans, whether it's Derbyshire North, Derbyshire South, or the grand unifying overarching Derbyshire, I don't see enough mention of local democracy on the ground. Dealing with people's problems, I'll move that across a bit. It does take time. Local councillors, whether they're county councillors or district and borough councillors, spend an awful lot of time with residents and trying to solve their problems. Reducing the number of people down to an absolute minimum while increasing the number of residents up to over 1 million is having the opposite effect. It's going to dilute our presence with our residents and dilute our capability of solving problems for them, which is one of the main reasons we're here. The party politics, the slagging off the Lib Dems, the slagging off reform of the Tories, it might be a lot of fun, but that's not the primary reason we're here. We're here to get good decisions. We're here to look after the interests of our residents, and I don't see that in any of this. I can understand if your main focus is on cutting costs, saving money, I can see the attraction of one big Derbyshire. But you're not going to save anywhere near the numbers that you think you are. If you merge two businesses together, the initial indications are always rosy and optimistic, but the benefits are usually far less than you expect. But I would like to say one thing that's pleased me this afternoon, apart from all the eloquent speeches, and that's nobody is bothering with the term devolution anymore. It's not devolution, it's centralisation of budgets and power. Now, you might think that this is the best option that we've got for Derbyshire. Who knows? But all of these attempts at local government reform at the moment are going to take democracy away from local people. You're not going to save as much money as you think you are, and ultimately it will be a failure. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Benfield.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. When I decided to stand as a county councillor, it wasn't out of a burning desire to become a politician. Far from it. My background is running businesses. Someone who likes to see results, balance the books, and understand why things work, or in the case of the council, why they don't work. Frankly, I wanted to see for myself why services were in decline and why so many decisions so many decisions seem to make so little sense. So I sort of find it a bit baffling that there's so much emotion to hang on to what we've currently got. In saying that, I also enjoy horse racing, and I own a few race horses. And in the race, you have to pick a horse that's running. And I can tell you there's a world of difference between backing a horse because you've studied the ground, the jockey and the conditions, and backing one just because you like the colour of the silks. The administration and the officers, in my view, have looked closely at the track, the distance and the conditions and decided which horse to pick. This seems the best option. To the administration, who may appear to question why we've gone for this option, I'd say perhaps if they used such evidence-based approach and on previous decisions, we might not be in the financial position we are today. Years of mismanagement have left this council with deep structural challenges, and this administration has had to pick up the reins and steady the ride. We've done this by studying the form, checking the odds, and thinking about who's actually paying the stake. I, for one, think that's a far better way to run a council than the alternatives that have come before. So in that case, I'll be backing this proposal.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Brown's going to speak, but she's not terribly well, so she's not going to stand.
If I stand up, I might come down quicker than I stood up. Just wanted to pick up on a point. Obviously, there's been some members of the other party that have been paying close attention to my social media. Maybe that's because they want to see how much work I'm getting done. Now, I did put on my social media that I did not support a full Derbyshire Council, and I wanted to see a donut. I did not want to be, and I still do not want to be, lumped with Derby City, but it is simply not an option. It's as simple as that. And my experience in a borough council, I can only speak for residents in my area, is I would say 75% of the people that contact, the residents that contact me, are contacting me because they've had no luck with the borough council. And they contact me and they come to me and I help get it solved. So maybe Long Eaton's different from your areas that you look after, but certainly in my area, I don't think the majority of people are going to be sorry to see Erewash Borough Council go. They do not want to be put in with Derby City Council. I do not want to be put in with Derby City Council, but it is not an option. It's not something, I cannot vote for that. It is not an option. So I just wanted to let that be known.
Thank you. Councillor Furness, please.
Thank you. I'm not the greatest orator in the world, so I'm going to keep this short and sweet. To clarify, I'm against it personally, not against our plan, but actually against LGR in principle. I do agree. There are other models that could be looked at. I'll keep those references to myself, though. I am slightly annoyed, though, how we've been put in this position and yet we're being called out by various parties in this chamber. As far as I was concerned, this was a Conservative policy that was brought in, that was taken on by Labour, that we have actually had to, bring to fruition. This idea that Derby City is this pestilence is, I find, shameful. The reality of the situation. The reality is that, as far as, the wider country thinks, Reform are the divisive party trying to separate everybody. And actually, we're trying to unite this county. And hopefully in 3 years' time, when we win the elections, we'll unite the country. The harsh reality is the city itself is only as bad as it is because of the actual people who run in the Derbyshire beforehand. They created the mess, not the individuals who live there. And so when I was actually told of our idea about the unifying of Derbyshire, one of the things that struck me was the debt the Derby City actually had and who would actually be absorbed into that particular model if you split the country in half. Is it fair that myself being an Amber Valley resident, the people in my area should actually incorporate Derby's debt? And the various parties were splitting it in between themselves, trying to find out what was best for them. And when I heard the idea of unifying Derby, I thought, well, that's best, because how better to absorb debt? Most of the borough councils are in debt, with the exception of Amber Valley and Erewash. So how better to deal with that issue than to actually absorb it as a whole, rather than actually asking people down south to take on that burden or people up north to take on that burden. So, so yeah, it was, from my personal point of view, I felt that this was a brilliant option. And let's be honest, whatever decision is made here, we're under some illusion that this is the way forward, this is what we're going to do. The fact is, the decision will be taken out of our hands. It will be made down in Westminster. So why should we, as a chamber, actually side with the boroughs and the district councils and go with what they want to do? The fact is, let's give people an option and, you know, let the best one win. That's the way that I see it. You know, and as regards to, you know, democracy and, you know, not having people to, you know, less councillors and nobody to actually contact or talk to, the reality is that constituents in my area, since I've, you know, come on board, have basically surprised in a way to speak to me, because they write and they email their MPs, their borough councillors, and they never hear anything. In fact, some of the people who are reaching out to me were previously Labour voters, Conservative voters, and the mere fact that they're actually reaching out to me, supposedly the enemy, it kind of is damning about how we currently have what we've got in place presently, because it isn't working. You know, people don't know who to contact. And those same people who were previously voting Conservative, Labour, are so happy to see me that they're willing to now vote for reform. So, you know, moving forward, there needs to be a better option. Is this the perfect option? No. But, you know, it's what we have in the short period of time that we've got. And for that reason, I will be voting for it, and I would actually ask anyone else to vote for it as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hatchett, please.
You'll be glad to know I'm not going to repeat what's already been said. Much of it I agree with, and I've listened very carefully to both sides of this. I have to say I've found it very difficult to make my mind up on how to go with this vote today. I think, you know, I very much agree that this is not something that most of us here have looked for. In terms of local government reorganisation, I don't think, you know, it's not something we welcome, and it's coming to us with rules imposed from above, which are probably constraining, you know, what we would really like to see happen. So, as I say, I won't say too much on all of that. The points I wanted to make were really on the democracy side of things. So, endorsing what Councillor Snowden has said about centralisation. This is not in any shape or form a move towards greater local democracy. And I was a bit taken aback by Councillor Graves, I'm sure it was in jest, about, you know, isn't it great to have fewer politicians? I just don't think it is. I think, you know, you can't represent your people adequately when there are 10,000 of them that you need to get to know. So it's that's a huge issue. The particular point that I'd like to make that I don't think has been made already is about the parish and town councils, and it's something that Councillor Foster alluded to. So I have 11 parish councils, rural parish councils in my area, and I do my very best to go to their parish council meetings because I think it's a good way of finding out what their local concerns are and what's going on the ground. They are weary with this. There is this feeling amongst all of them that this is being imposed. They have very little say in how it's going to turn out. They are worried about the workload that might be coming down to them, and nobody seems to be taking it into account. There's nothing that I read about how much help we're going to give parish councils. They struggle already to find enough people willing to be on the parish council. I think, I'm not sure about all, but certainly several of the parish councils in my area have got vacancies because they found it hard to recruit. It would have been nice in this document if it had at least tried to sketch out more about how local democracy can be delivered. So my colleague, Councillor Kinsella, mentioned the area committees, and there is a little bit of mention in the document about parish councils, but not really any detail. And I think not really an acknowledgement of what support they might need to even begin to fill the gap that's going to be left by the dissolution, or if that's the word, of the boroughs and the districts. So I think, you know, this is a good attempt at a proposal. I don't think I can support it.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Ball, please.
Thank you, Chair. Well, when this first come forward earlier this year, I was flabbergasted about the idea of putting Ashbourne and Ashbourne South as a suburb of Derby City. I was inundated with residents complaining, asking me what was going on, saying that this was all a waste of time, money, and they were absolutely disgusted with it. I said this at council. Councillor Graves told me to stop spitting his gummies out. The residents will tell us if there's a problem. You've had that tell. Amber Valley and Derbyshire Dales are the two biggest respondents to the consultation you put out, and nobody wants anything to do with Derby City. You yourself, Chair, you put a video out saying that your wife and children had gone to Derby City and they were frightened and had to come home. So it just shows why the people of Ashbourne and Ashbourne South are so worried, because besides South Derbyshire, they're the nearest people in Derbyshire Dales to get to in Derby City. Now, this isn't all about us and making the decisions, or the officers putting things forward. On May the 1st, we were elected by the residents, and they decided who they were voting for and who they'd give most respect to and who they thought would support them. And the point I'm putting over, the residents of Ashbourne South, and a lot in Ashbourne who supported you, have come to me. I went round 25 parishes I cover, not 2, 3, 25. I had meetings nearly at every one, special meetings, and there wasn't one parish council that wanted anything to do with Derby City. Now, I've been elected by them residents and the voters to support them in Derbyshire Dales not being Ashbourne South, not being put into a suburb of Derby. I know this has changed the ball game a bit, but I am still, if Derby City is included, I know where Ashbourne South and the nearby rural villages will end up in the years to come. And we struggle to get anything done in Ashbourne South. It's hard work to get a pothole or anything, and you do a good job, Charlotte, but it's still hard to get work done. It's hard to get a reply, and we've been through all this. But the main thing is, what I'm putting over, the people should decide this. There should be a referendum and let the people decide what organisation the Derbyshire County Council and Derby City, not us.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hill, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I think on May the 1st, we know that the other parties were not laughing when Reform took control of Derbyshire County Council. And I think following on, we know that they definitely won't be laughing in 2029 either. But what we've had to sit through is hours of endless speeches as usual. But we've also had to listen to jeers about our inexperience. And we've also had to listen to how we're not taking into account what the local democracy means. But I think what the other parties are ignoring is the fact that we were elected by the Democratic majority. And we were elected by the Democratic majority because of your inadequate ability of running a local council. So now, regardless of what your opinions are, if we don't see eye to eye, rather than jeering about inexperience, why don't you realise that the public were not happy with your experience and they were not happy with what you were delivering, hence why you now have reform.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Smith, please.
So I'm working class lad, like most of my fellow councillors in the Reform Party. For too long, the Tories have had control of Derbyshire County Council. Labour's had control of Derbyshire County Council. And what did we find on May the 2nd when Reform got in? The council is in far too much debt. Yes, I'll be the first to admit I'm against the LGR. However, this is a card we've been dealt with. This is the cards we've got to be on that table, given our cards. This is the only viable option, I believe. We've got to include Derby City. So one Derbyshire is going to be far better. We've had people be able to go to the council and get the bins sorted, get the housing crisis sorted. The housing sorted. Right now, my residents in Brimton don't know which councillor to turn to. Now they'll be able to turn to the councillor and be able to have their problems sorted by this unitary Derbyshire. So I will be voting for it.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor George, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Coming from this as an independent councillor, I'm very pleased to be looking just at the issues for the people of Derbyshire and not at the party politics of it any longer, which is great. From a personal point of view and looking at the best interests of people, I personally support unitary authorities. I've seen them work in metropolitan areas, and to be quite honest, I am fed up of asking for something to be done by the county and being told, oh, it's not us, it's the borough. You go to the borough and they go, oh, that's not us, that's the county. I mean, hands up, how many councillors have had that? It becomes inefficient, and we get the two layers of government working against each other. And in our area, we've got the town and parish councils, we've got the borough council, we've got the county council, we've got the mayor. And between all of them, they're supposed to be making decisions, but it doesn't work for people. They just think there is one council that takes decisions, and whatever happens, it's the wrong decision, and we're all to blame. And it's very difficult to explain to people, no, that's a borough issue. That's a county issue. So from that point of view, just practically, to get officers working together at every layer would be great if it can happen. It's also be good to make sure that the issues that we as a county council sometimes need borough and district councils to act on to make things work for residents from a county council perspective, but it's not in the borough's interest. In terms of accessible housing, it will help us as a social care provider if we get more accessible housing. But from a borough and district council's point of view, they just need numbers of houses being built, and they need to get the maximum built. So they don't necessarily looking to build accessible housing, but we just look at the bills for social care rising and rising and rising, and all the older people stuck in big homes, unable to downsize because there isn't that accessible housing there. Look at poverty and tackling poverty. There's so much that you can do with council tax data, which is held by borough and district councils, but But because of GDPR, they're not able to liaise with the county council about numbers of parents on free school meals, with our welfare rights department, to support people out of poverty when they see them getting into council debt, and therefore to increase the council tax intake and reduce the number of debtors. So there's lots of ways in which those artificial boundaries between borough and county do not work. They don't work for the councils, any of them as a whole, and they don't work for residents. That said, I'm quite long in the tooth in politics. I remember back in 1993, the local government reorganisation, and looking at Derbyshire as a whole as it was then, including Derby City, also including the districts. And Derby City was brought into Derbyshire in the 1974 local government reorganisation. I don't remember that far back, but I do remember that it did not work for those 20 years. The interests of the county and the shire of Derbyshire and of the city were completely different. As others have said, we've got a lot of urban deprivation within Derby. We've got rural communities within the rest of Derbyshire. Most of us are in rural areas, and those interests do not align. It's in terms of whether a county is focusing on providing services rurally, which costs a lot more, and you need the local knowledge and the officers to be able to do that, or whether they're focusing on what will be the biggest proportion of the population around Derby City and the major towns around there. And that will, as we've seen in terms of the Kemare, it's the Derby and Nottingham areas that get the funding, that get the notice, that get the support, because that is where the political reality lies. So the rest of us, I mean, I'm in High Peak. Most people in High Peak haven't been to Derby. Doesn't mean that they wanted to be aligned with Greater Manchester either. They were very positive about that. They haven't been asked about Derby City because our consultation did not include a whole county unitary. And I think we need to make sure that what happens is in the best interest of people, but also that if we are going to have a reorganisation, we understand why, because I personally am worried that a lot of those of us who represent areas that are a long way from Derby City and that centre of population will see the funding sucked away towards what's both an area of deprivation, which this government and this mayor will want to focus on, but also that's where the political balance will lie in a whole Derby City and Derbyshire. If you split it up, yes, there are still issues, and I pity anyone who's in a rural area that is looking to be amalgamated with Derby City, because that will happen. At least the areas that are closer to Derby City will be able to have more influence and more say because they're closer. But those areas that are much farther away from that centre of power, that centre of population, will not have that influence. So I'd ask, have a look at your own populations, have a look at what your interests are of your constituents. Do they align with where the political balance will lie in a combined Derby and Derbyshire? And if they don't, then think very carefully, because this is going to have implications for a long time to come. The last unification in 1974 took 20 years to undo the problems that had caused. We don't want to see another 20 years of problems for people across Derbyshire. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Arena, you reserve the right to speak. Do you wish to speak?
Well, be some interesting speeches. We've had a trot through history, I think, and a few poets thrown in. Some of the people who speak in this room are really quite talented. I'd like to clear up just a couple of minor points, and these are just minor points. I think there was talk of heroic financial assumptions. Lovely words. We didn't make the financial assumptions. We're being supported by PricewaterhouseCoopers. They've done all the calculations. Sorry? Well, we're going to send you the bill, so The district councils have been supported by KPMG. So nobody from Reform's been bashing a calculator here. They've been working quite closely with our officers, and I'd like to thank our officers for the hard work they've done. But we've not generated any of these performance or savings suggestions. These have come from accountants. And they might be heroic in terms of assumptions, only time will tell. However, what the county have also done is had the advantage of talking to the County Council network. For those not familiar with this is a small group of analysts in London who look at all councils and gather data in. So the assumptions provided by PricewaterhouseCoopers give us as a break-even point a few years in the future, and the Labour ones through KPMG suggest break-even between year 4 and 5. The thing is that this unitary situation is not unique. Many councils down south have already gone through this. And the County Council network have told us about past performance, and historically, the councils that have gone before us have broken even between years 4 and 5 and started showing profit from year 5 onwards. The suggestion we put forward actually shows break even at 2.5 years, so twice as quick and twice as much saving. So we haven't generated the figures at all. Is it viable financially? There's a lot of talk about savings. Is that the prime concern? Well, finance and savings is a big concern. I mean, I'm looking at the peer review because we're looking at a new one. Peer review is where other councils come and see how we're going. And the last one we had were in 2019. And I read the opening statement that says Derbyshire had the highest level, second highest level of reserves in the UK. We were the second wealthiest for unallocated reserves. We arrived to find us barely above minimum reserve. Our friends in the Conservatives, it appears in the paperwork, never took a difficult decision, just ran down the reserves. The reserves are in a deplorable situation. So savings are required, I'm afraid. There's reference to that this conversation started long before we arrived. That's true. My councillors arrived on a moving train. It had already left the station. This discussion is been around for a year or two. And there's talk about us being inexperienced, etc. We arrived in May to find that the previous discussion or idea had already been put forward by the Conservatives, this donut model, this everything but Derby. And we got the strong indication that this would not even be acceptable to the government. It wasn't even an acceptable option. And then we started to listen to what the districts were discussing, the variations of the north-south divide. They were the 3 options open to us. And despite what people think, I was on the calls with Councillor Graves, with the leaders of the districts, and we engaged in 2 or 3 of those calls. And then they didn't want us to be involved past that. So it wasn't us withdrawing from it by any means. Actually, the districts decided to go their own way. We were legally obliged to share data, and before Emma Alexander left us, she worked quite hard to actually make sure that we did share data. But the 2 accountancy practices have come up with totally different figures. The districts, despite having a north-south split, will end up, according to KPMG, saving more than 1 unitary. It's remarkable. It's almost like looking through a looking glass, which is why we need to fall back on past performance from the County Council network, which shows that there is a break-even point, usually between years 4 and 5. So having arrived on a moving train, having had previous suggestions put forward, what's happened, the Councillor Graves team, is that we've looked at it in a cold and dispassionate and logical way and come up with another option, the most logical option. There is some talk about lack of democracy. I totally understand that. But one has to also look at the bigger picture. So there's a little group in my neck of the woods in Bolsover who looked at how many elected officials there are in Bolsover with all the different layers of councils, parish, district, town, county, mayors, MPs, police and fire commissioners. And in one constituency, there's 175 elected officials, and that's repeated in every constituency in Derbyshire, and then even more in Derby City. If you were building a business and had Derbyshire as a blank map, and were looking to place councillors in it to run it, there's no way you'd come up with the current configuration. No way on earth you would pick that many councillors. And then you say that there is a lack of local contact and that the members of the public are very happy with having so many councils. Please come to a Cresswell Parish meeting or a Shirebrook Parish meeting where the local council at Cresswell have borrowed £3 million and Cresswell's bankrupt and won't be able to do anything for 50 years. Ask them parishioners if they're happy with local representation. Ask the Shirebrook people if they're happy with their council who set off building a cemetery for £6 million and now at £15 million and are looking at bankruptcy. Ask them if they're happy with local representation. They're going to say no. So it is down to how good that local council is and how well trained it is. So, we arrive on this moving train, we put forward another option, but I would like to draw your attention to the general direction of travel. So, consider that we've got parish, town district, county, and previously county would have had money for development. Recent times, the government has decided to put a mayor on top of that and put all the development to the Labour mayor. The Labour mayor runs Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire. The direction of travel is to go larger, not smaller. That's the signal government's giving us. And I'm fascinated to hear that there's going to be an abolition of the Police and Crime Commissioner. And those duties are going to be passed to the mayor, particularly since our friend Councillor Foster did such a good job in that role, and I pay homage to that. But more powers to the mayor. And what the government want is less people to communicate with at the top and larger groupings. That's the direction of travel. Councillor Reid referenced the danger to a northern unitary not having enough employment and ultimately being broken up. That's looking 20 years in the future. We also hear of the fear of being dragged into Derby City. It's quite interesting to listen to different councillors. I heard the leader of Leicester bemoan their unitary where they were going to have Stoke-on-Trent dragged into their unitary and they owe £1 billion. So they're going to be taking on £1 billion of debt in Stoke-on-Trent. They don't want much to do with that. So we have a councillor talk here about how divisive this particular proposal is, and yet there's much talk here about not wanting anything to do with Derby City. Possibly quite rightly so. Maybe, maybe not. But you want me to wind up? All right. Oh, I've got a full minute. Okay.
30 seconds.
No pressure then. Thank you, Chair. The direction of travel is larger. The current model, as pointed out by our independent councillor, isn't ideal and not working, and you wouldn't plan it that way. So what we've put forward, whilst not ideal, is at least logical. We'll break even in 2.5 years. The extra savings are 20 million. That's what we're chasing here. That's what the public need, because 20 million is 20 million more we can spend on our kids, taking veterans off the roads. Sorry? I am talking. Do you mind?
Time's up.
Oh, time's up. I'm voting for this anyway.
There's no need to call for the name vote yet. Is that what you're after?
Just to get the technical things out of the way.
Is this a point of order?
Could I ask the people who wish to have a named vote to stand?
Don't, we're not there yet. Please sit down. Right, before I call on Councillor Graves to close the debate, seeing as Councillor Bull has addressed me directly, I'm going to respond. You talk about suburbanisation. And one of the reasons I'm here is because I've been appalled at the development of this country. Between Ashbourne and Derby, Mackworth being concreted over, more of my family's land that they've farmed for generations being lost. Brailsford, swamped with houses. Kirk Langley, swamped with houses. Proposals for a brand new village at Osmaston on Shirley Common, again divided by a trunk road. These are already proposals that are in train. The majority of your residents live in new houses built to the south of Ashbourne. So to think that they don't think that they're part of Derby, they've been, I don't want to say NIMBYism, but I'm sure they will have different views to the residents of the villages. The division that Councillor... Solar panels, again on land that I've worked, yeah. Councillor Furness talked about division. I'm so proud to sit in this chair and to wear this chain of office and to be here as Derbyshire County Chairman. And when I say Derbyshire, I don't differentiate between the county and the city. I am proud of Derby City. It is the home of the Industrial Revolution, the home of the railways that conquered the world. Rolls-Royce, Derby County Football Club. But equally, I am appalled at the state it is. And it's not just that city, it is cities across this country, and they've got to be changed. And we've got to bring this back to a place that our families do feel safe and that women and children do feel safe. Councillor Melandra Smith's not here today, but she was talking yesterday about having to escort her daughter to school and to the bus stop because of the danger she feels in Buxton. In Buxton. It's appalling. So we have got to get hold of this country. So thank you for your contribution, and I will be supporting this motion. Councillor Graves, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to say a few words about some of the speeches that we've had. I wasn't going to, but I think I ought to. First of all, I think Councillor Rini had sort of mentioned it. We need to thank Rob Lowe for bringing this document to us and all his team. I think it's a superb document for saying all the changes that he's had to deal with. So well done to you. I actually thought, Mr. Chairman, that today, that we would all be talking about the pros and cons of what the proposal that we bring forward and whether they think something's right or wrong. However, what I found, particularly to start with, was how negative the opposition parties are. And it's almost as if whatever we'd have brought here, there'd have been negative responses. They'd have said, no, we don't like that, we don't like that. It didn't matter what we brought. You'd have just been extremely negative. And even Councillor Fordham, he stands up there and he didn't like anybody's plan, not just ours, he didn't even like the district's plans. That's because he hasn't got any plan of his own. He has got no idea where this council wants to go. And I find that quite very negative. The other thing I found is there was a theme in quite a lot of things that people spoke about. I love this phrase, twin hatters. It wasn't something I'm really familiar with, actually. But twin hatters, at first I wondered what it was, but okay, it's about councillors. And you're all concerned about your other jobs. That you're not concerned about how you represent the council or how you represent the residents. You're bothered about your two jobs, your twin hatters. But I'm not worried about it. I'm supporting one. I'm absolutely supporting one. But you're not. You're all concerned about where your pocket is. And I mean, I know you congratulated Councillor Foster, but I mean, she said this is why she was a councillor. I think the reason you're a councillor, Councillor Foster, is because you lost your election as a police and crime commissioner. Now, when you talk about Derby City, about them taking over us, which is quite a strange view. You know, have you ever looked at the size of Derbyshire? Good gracious. Derby actually say about us consuming them. That's their fear. It seems like everybody's feared about who's consuming who. And one thing I have to say, Mr. Chairman, one thing I was hoping that you would deal with, but you didn't, and that is Councillor Gourlay's contribution. I think it was disgraceful, it was disgusting, talking about people of Derbyshire in such a way that I think does not become of this council. And I think councillors should be careful about how they call other people, particularly people that don't belong to this council. I just found that quite very shameful, to be honest. Very, very shameful. One other thing was about consultation. Somebody over here talked about consultation. The government will consult on whatever decision they make. So residents will, if they choose this option, and just remember, they might not choose it. This is just something we are playing with. We're thinking what we need to do is we need to put something forward. So here we are, we're putting a viable, sensible solution forward for the government to make it a serious attempt at having a choice that we want to make. But the government will consult on all their statutory consultees. But I just want to update the chamber on how we arrived at this position, Mr. Chairman. In May this year, we inherited an odd scheme concocted by the Conservatives. Maybe this scheme reflected their election results, who knows. To me, it was clear that the donut scheme was unworkable and would have done the opposite of uniting Derbyshire. It would have divided Derbyshire. As leader, I believe that following the district's initial findings, that people supported what all the other councils were leading on, a two-tier unitary solution. It seemed to coincide with the government's idea of how it should work. Then every council, including ours, consulted on the two-tier solution. The result was astounding. There was no clear best solution. No one wanted the solutions put forward. Maybe two-tier was not a great slogan, as two-tier has become synonymous with unfairness and poor choices. I am proud to say that I've always listened to the majority of people because I believe as councillors we are here to serve them. Not each other, not the government, not the regional mayor, but all of the people of Derbyshire. The consultation results were absolutely clear to me. No two-tier, no division, a uniting Derbyshire solution was required. People didn't want a divided Amber Valley, Councillor Bull. People didn't want a divided Derbyshire Dales. You're quite right, Mr. Bull. Councillor Bull, sorry. People didn't want a Chesterfield amalgamating into a Yorkshire Sheffield. People didn't want a Glossop swallowed into Manchester. They all wanted a united Derbyshire. Uniting Derbyshire is the best choice on the table. Uniting Derbyshire is part of the reformation of the United Kingdom. I hope that you will all support uniting Derbyshire. Mr. Chairman, Councillor Gully, you really need to understand how the workings of the council works. Mr. Chairman, I call for a recorded vote so we can all see who supports uniting Derbyshire. Thank you.
Thank you. We're moving to the vote. I think that's more than 5 that's required. So we're now going to move to a recorded vote.
Could we just be placed on the record that Councillor Angelique Foster was a councillor here before she was Police and Crime Commissioner? She sits here because she was a councillor first and was elected subsequently as Police and Crime Commissioner. It's unfair to suggest otherwise.
Thank you. I didn't think you needed picking up. So, we'll hear what we're here for.
Thank you for that. I couldn't quite hear what you were saying.
Councillor Alan Grave knows about this council.
Mr. Chairman, point of order. I would just like to apologise to the member. Obviously, I got that wrong.
Thank you, Councillor Graves. Right, we're now going to proceed to the vote. Thank you.
Okay, so this is in support of the recommendations moved by Councillor Graves. So either state for, against or abstain when I call your name. So Councillor Abbott. Councillor Adams.
For.
Councillor Barnes. Councillor Benfield. Councillor Bent. Councillor Bromley. Councillor Brown. Councillor Bull.
Against.
Councillor Burfoot. Councillor Clark. Councillor Cliff. Councillor Dale. Councillor Elsden. Councillor Ford. Councillor Fordham. Councillor Foster. Councillor Furness. Councillor Gates. Councillor George. Councillor Gourlay. Councillor Graves. Councillor Greenhalgh. Councillor Groovy. Councillor Hallett. Councillor Hart. Councillor Harvey. Councillor Hatchett. Councillor Hatfield. Councillor Hill. Councillor Hobson. Councillor Isherwood. Councillor Kinsella. Councillor Lawson. Councillor Mabbott. Councillor McGuinness. Councillor Major. Councillor Matthews. Councillor Millwood. Councillor Monkman, sorry. Councillor Mowsler. Councillor Oxbury. Councillor Parkin. Councillor Price. Councillor Robert Reaney. Councillor Sarah Reaney. Councillor Redfern. Councillor Reid. Councillor Richard Smith. Councillor Snowden. Councillor Somerville. Councillor Sutton. Councillor Turrell. Councillor Wheelton. Councillor Whitbread. Councillor Wilson. Thank you, that's carried.
As Alex says, that's been approved, and that's the end of the meeting. Thank you all for your attendance. I wish you a safe journey home. Thank you.